Thank you very much for coming. I realize it's very crowded, but I think this is a testament to Robert Fisk's popularity.
No, it's the Egyptian Revolution.
It's always a pleasure to host Mr. Fisk here. We're very happy to consider him a friend of Diwan's, and it's always a pleasure to have him. The first time he came was at Diwan's 5th anniversary, and he spoke brilliantly to a lot of our issues. And if I recall, the theme 5 years ago was, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years? But I don't think anyone expected this. So without wasting any more of your time, I'm very happy to present Robert Fisk.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was, of course, the traffic that made me late. Oddly enough, I've tried to go back through all Western press and see if anyone ever predicted what happened from January 25 onwards this year. And I can't find anyone who actually got it right. In the summer of 2010, I was doing a series of articles on honour killing in Pakistan, Jordan, Gaza and Egypt. And I did spend 2 days in Bolak al-Dakrur. And, you know, there were children there in bare feet paddling in sewage, and I actually began the article saying, how can the Egyptians tolerate this? Question mark. There was no reply, of course, and I had no idea what was going to happen. I must say that I've only been here for a few days. Before this, I've been in Syria for almost a week, and before that I was in Istanbul, so you're more up to date on the revolution, quote unquote, than I can be after just a few days back in Cairo. I must admit that when you reach military communique number 86, it's getting a bit boring. And I really have been saying over and over again on Egyptian television and in my newspaper tomorrow that Field Marshal Tantawi must get another hat. This baseball-style American military thing just doesn't... How about just an ordinary beret, like a real soldier, like his soldiers wear normally? Also, I've been saying I hope that every time Field Marshal Tantawi gets out of bed in the morning, he says 3 times, I was not elected, I was not elected, I was not elected. I don't think he's a particularly bad guy. There's one general there, I'm watching carefully, we all know who he is, and it's not Tantawi. But I did have, of course, been wandering around Tahrir Square. I find it a rather sad place now, I have to say. It's become, of course, like all revolutionary, iconic, I hate that word, images. There's garbage everywhere. You've been there yourself. People are arguing with each other. The vendors hate the shopkeepers. You can buy anything from firecrackers to eggs to used gas grenades. I must say that when I read the words printed on the side of the CS gas cartridges, you know, and saying at the end, wrong use can result in injury or death made in the USA. I did wonder whether this wasn't the real Obama speech of 2 years ago, as opposed to the one that you heard at Cairo University. I guess that over the last year when I've come into Egypt, one of the things I learned was that I think that your revolution probably began in Mahala in 2006. I went up to Mahala and spent 2 days there. I've never seen so many tok-toks in my life before, and the trains are awful. But anyway, I did meet the people who got the trade union strikers onto the streets in 2006 in Mahala, complete with a little Tahrir Square, tents, gas grenades being lobbed by the security police, the use of mobile phones to bring people in from the countryside round Mahala. And I was very struck at the fact that the dry run for 2011, if you like, it was there. There were clear signs of something that was going to come. And in 2009, the women told me, the women came out, they're in separate factories in the spinning industry in Mahala, as you may know. They said they tried again in 2009 and people were too frightened then. I haven't quite worked out why, but they tried again. And of course, when the people of Mahala came to Tahrir Square in February, I completely missed the significance of this, that these were the people who had the trade union power. And when the strike started, that was when I suspect, not these ridiculous air shows, these F-18s over the hotels of central Cairo, not even the tanks arriving beside the square. I rather think the use of trade unions, the use that trade unions could be employed for the revolution was probably a very key element that I haven't certainly yet fully appreciated. It's interesting that in Tunisia, where they had a strong trade union movement, the strikes actually were probably what propelled Ben Ali out, although as we now know he was actually planning to go back, and it was the crew of his aircraft who decided to leave him behind in Saudi Arabia. But it does raise the question, when you have a strong trade union movement, which you could have under the dictatorships in Egypt and Tunisia, and where you do not have a strong trade union, like Libya, well forget it, Syria where it's embedded in the Ba'ath Party, Bahrain, forget it, Yemen, where you do not have a strong working class trade union movement, the revolution, I suspect, tends to be more bloody. I don't know if that's true or not, because you have to write PhD theses to know if that's accurate. But I do rather suspect that has something to do with it. And I'll be very interested to see in the coming days whether Egypt goes through more strikes or not, depending on the events. Excuse me, it's not my news editor, so I'm going to turn it off now. I hope it's not, anyway. So I'll be very interested to see in the coming days whether strikes start again, and whether they are for purely financial improvements, social improvements, or whether they're part of, quote, the revolution, unquote. I suppose I'd have to say that going back in my mind over those critical 18 days, and I arrived here on the morning of January 26 this year, it makes me wonder about all the, I've been reporting these dictators here for more than 35 years now. And that many of them, particularly Gaddafi and Saddam, but it does apply to your own former great leader, they're sort of a mixture of Don Corleone and Donald Duck. The weird mixture of personal power and the desire to be deeply loved, which doesn't really work, as we know. And one of the things that struck me very much over the course of the last years is the degree to which the various dictators actually really do regard their countries as their personal property, as if they have property rights signed legally, that they own it. And of course, in doing so, they can then pass it on to their sons, whether it be Gamal, Saif al-Islam, as Hafez did to Bashar, and so on and so forth. Of course, every father knows that his son is the most wonderful man in the world, and therefore is most suitable to succeed him as the next caliph, because we're having caliphates. I mean, Syria is a caliphate. This was going to be a caliphate. Libya was going to be a caliphate. Osama bin Laden raged and raged and raged about the end of the caliphate in 1922. He had no need to worry. There are lots of them around, or about to be. You managed to stop the one here. One of the things, I have to come in here because I did meet bin Laden 3 times, is that I think when he died, he was a has-been. He was over. Al-Qaeda had finished. Not totally in a physical military way, but politically it was out. Because in Libya, and in Tunisia, and in Bahrain, and in Syria, and in, of course, Cairo, I never once ever saw a single picture of Osama bin Laden or any banner representing Al-Qaeda. And this was the man who told everyone, including me, we, Al-Qaeda, will get rid of these Western-style puppet dictators in the Arab world, and they totally failed to do so. You did it, Al-Qaeda didn't. And that is a critical issue which the Americans simply still don't get. I go to Washington, unfortunately for me, and I face this problem all the time. But they're Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, look at Tunisia. I keep saying it, but it's a Muslim world, most of it. Most of the people who live here are Muslims. Do you think the Christian Democratic Party in Germany or Italy is about to start the 13th Crusade? But there's no way you can stop this flood. And Tom Friedman sort of moves around the edges of it. Tom Friedman, by the way, now charges $100,000 an hour for lectures. If I had $100,000, I would pay it not to listen to Tom Friedman for an hour. But in a way, you see, I think that what the revolutions, if you watch them in their various forms, and the Libyan version is one of the most frightening, what's actually happened is that people are saying it's not your personal property anymore. And when I was walking 2 days ago on the first day of the voting, and I realized the degree to which the powers that be will try and use the numbers who voted to destroy the integrity of Tahrir Square, I realized exactly what's happening. But when I saw, I had to walk half a mile, 3/4 of a mile actually in Shubra to get from the back of the queue to the polling station. I think that all these people, whether they were doing so, they were actually thinking consciously in this framework, or whether they actually were realizing it, I think they were all saying, Egypt belongs to us. Even if it's only 3 square meters of sand, it's mine. That is the great victory which has happened throughout, I think, the Middle East in the past years, I'll say, because although Mahala was probably the dry run in historical terms for what happened here in Egypt in the famous 18 days, I rather suspect, by the way, I don't use the word Arab Spring, I loathe it. I think it started in Washington, like the famous Cedar Revolution. That's not a Lebanese expression. But I think it started in 2005, when 1 million Lebanese came onto the streets of Beirut. And I was there for this demonstration against the Syrians, of course. They wanted the Syrians out, and there was a UN Security Council resolution following the murder of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri on February 14th, 2005. What was very interesting then is that President Lahoud, another general who became the president, watch out, he was head of the army in Lebanon. He became Syria's man as the president. He ordered the Lebanese army to keep 1 million people out of Martyrs Square in central Beirut. And the army commander for Beirut, whom I know very well, he said no, and he ordered his soldiers, instead of, normally when a soldier puts his rifle over his shoulder on the strap, the barrel is up and the butt is down. He told them to turn them the other way around, so the butt was up and the barrel was pointing at the road. In other words, we won't shoot at our own people. So there was another little precedent, if you remember the tanks, that the M1A1 battle tanks that came into the square, the famous wonderful air display. Why did the air display ever take place, by the way? The F-18s, wasn't it incredible? I'd never seen an air display through Cairo hotels before. Anyway, but back in Lebanon, I suspect that may have been the actual beginning of the Arab, or even the Muslim, awakening. I like the words Arab awakening because, of course, it comes from George Antonius's extraordinary, brilliant, still incredible book on the Arab Revolt of 1916 and the betrayal, Sykes-Picot, and so on, and Balfour, of course. And I think that it was very interesting. In 2009, I was in Tehran, again, on the streets, after the elections, which I think, by the way, Ahmadinejad probably won, but not by the preposterous figure that he claimed. And a lot of people were saying to me, oh, you're from Beirut. Did you use Facebook? Did you use mobile phones? What did they do? What did they do in Beirut? So there was a clear understanding in Tehran that something in Beirut was of great importance to those who wished to protest at the government in Tehran. So these two huge events, of course the Iranian one ended in at least temporary tragedy up to now. Beirut, well, it's a little bit amorphous because we know who's in the government at the moment. But it seems to me that the roots of the Arab awakening, or the Muslim awakening, go back quite a few years. Why did it happen overall? Everyone, of course, the Americans like to say it's technology, the Facebook, the internet, which I don't even use, by the way, so I'm not the person to talk about technology. Yes, of course, it played a major role. But I think there were two other things. Although education, as we know in Egypt, is not to the standard that we would all wish, it's improved enormously since I first came here in 1976. And more than that, when I first came to Egypt, most people I met, except for the wealthy, the elite, etc., had never been outside Egypt. Now millions of Egyptians, for work or for pleasure even, have been outside, whether it be to Jordan, to Lebanon, working in Libya, not a great experience in the recent past, but whether it be to Europe or to America, they've seen another life. So these three things together, travel, improved education, particularly, for example, at the University of Cairo. I gave a lecture there about 3 years ago. I was stunned by the improvement since the 70s in learning, the intellectual rigor of the students and so on and so forth, and the technology. I think these three things came together because I asked Mohammed Hussein Hakel after February, the revolution was well, it wasn't completed, it was going to go on after you and I have all died of old age, I think. It doesn't fit into journalistic timeframes. But I asked Hakel, tell me about how dictators become dictators. He said, they become a dictator and they move, here, these are his words, into a sea of quietness. And I sort of understood this because you see what all dictators do, apart from putting up statues, naming roads, streets, airports, railway stations and so on, after themselves, is they infantilize their people. You must all go back and be children. You will go to school, and you will do what the headmaster says, but you are children. Remember, the last speech that Mubarak made when he was going to go but didn't go, he began, "My children." You see? Infantilization.